Hello! Welcome to another episode of the Jericho Comedy Podcast. I'm your host, Conor McReynolds, and this week I'm speaking to an act who I love seeing at Jericho Comedy. She's appeared on QI and is often heard on BBC Radio 4. She's a stand-up comedian who previously spent her working life as a TV executive working at Comedy Central and MTV, amongst many other cool places. My guest this week is the brilliant Cally Beaton. I'll be chatting to Cally all about comedy in lockdown and about her brilliantly honest and candid material, which always guarantees audiences at Jericho such a great night. We'll also be playing you a little message from our wonderful charity partner, Oxfordshire Mind. But right now, here is the superb Cally Beaton. Cally Beaton, thank you so much for joining me on the Jericho Comedy Podcast.
My pleasure. What else is a comedian to do during a pandemic? Very happy to be here. I mean, I'd be here even if it wasn't a pandemic, obviously.
Of course.
No, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to speak to you. I mean, obviously, I want to start by asking how your lockdown's been, but yours has been, it sounds like it's been quite a full-on experience because you had COVID, didn't you?
I did have COVID. Yes, I got ill on the second day of lockdown. So I was an early adopter, as I'd like to always be in my life. And I got quite ill with it, actually. Having been very smug. I think I was saying to you last time I saw you at a gig, I really underestimated this whole virus, as I'm sure many of us did. Yeah. And I particularly had a certain swagger about I was like, well, I'm a runner and I'm never ill. And you guys are so pathetic. And what mask. And then obviously then I did get ill and I was all right for the first bout. So I had sort of the usual 10 days with a sort of fever and feeling a bit odd, but nothing too bad. And then it came back as pneumonia. I had my own second COVID stage, which is apparently that's the pattern of it. So yeah, it was quite bad. I was ill for the best part of 2 months. So yes, there I was, a smug runner, laid up in bed, not even able to walk down the stairs unassisted. So it was a bit grim and a bit odd because it meant while everybody else was kind of getting used to whatever lockdown was, I remember the first time I went out, it was almost 2 months after Boris announced it. God. And I was really like, I don't know what to do. Like I hadn't been part of the sort of queuing and the this thing and the that thing. So I literally felt like I'd been plonked on another planet. So it was not an auspicious start to what was a hard time for everybody.
God, that is absolutely bonkers. Like, was it just like a slow recovery, or was it like an intense kind of period of being unwell, or a bit of both?
It was both. I suppose I had this is really the most unfunny conversation you'll ever have had on this. I can only apologise.
So glad I brought us down this path. Yeah,
exactly. And I've really gone with it. I'd say I had about a month of being pretty ill. And the weird thing is with it, for any of your lovely listeners who might be about to get it or would like to know what it's like, although they may get it completely differently. But for people who get it seriously, and they don't seem to know why some people do and some don't, although age does seem to have something to do with it. But they, you sort of feel like you're getting better and then you just drop off a cliff again illness-wise. So it's so weird. You have a couple of days where you're like, I'm recovered. And then you get really kind of ill again. So it just was that the doctor that was, because I obviously was under medical supervision for quite a lot of it. And one of the doctors said to me that it was like a sort of saw's tooth pattern, and you sort of get a little climb up feeling better and then you literally drop back down again. But he said cumulatively you are getting better. It just doesn't feel like it because you get these massive sort of setbacks. So yeah, it was just like weeks and weeks of thinking, I'm all right now, and then another setback. So it sort of felt like, I don't know how it is I have an idea how it is for other comics and performers, but because I think everybody sort of panicked at the start and thought, the venues are shut and can't get my voice out. So everybody was thinking, I'll do TikTok and I'll do little vignettes on Twitter and I'll boost my kind of Insta presence. And everyone was sort of thinking, and I'll do a podcast and everyone thought of things to do, not all of which were good ideas. Some of them were great. But while that was happening, I just sort of kept thinking I must do something to get myself out there in lockdown. But my brain and body just weren't playing ball. So by the time I finally sort of came to, I felt a bit like the train had left the station. I was like, I don't really know what a comedian's meant to do in lockdown. So I felt that I'd been left behind a bit. Although from what I gather most of us are feeling a bit like that. So it probably wasn't specific to being ill.
Yeah, although it certainly obviously doesn't help. But I mean, you have launched yourself back into the sort of new world of comedy. Like you came along to Jericho Comedy to one of our drive-in shows.
I loved that show so much. That was yeah, I got quite emotional before and afterwards, because that was, by then I'd done lots of Zoom gigs, and I hadn't done
Yeah,
anything even vaguely in person. I hadn't done an outdoor gig with real people at all. So when I got
yeah,
to your lovely gig, and I'm not just saying this because it's your podcast, but when I got to the gig and I didn't really know what to expect, brewery car park could mean a lot of different things.
Sure.
And I think and it was just such a beautiful setting. And as you'll remember, it was lovely, lovely summer's evening.
Yeah,
And even being, I live in North London, and even being outside London for a reason, being in Oxford
of
felt quite
course, yeah.
exciting. And then, as you remember, it was just the most lovely evening. Like, the weather was lovely, and because it was just that lovely number of cars and lots of people sort of roofs down or hanging out their windows or
Yeah,
sitting on the
yeah.
roofs of vans, it felt like a real live comedy gig. And that was the first one I'd done that felt like that in about, I don't know, 6 months. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was definitely quite an emotional evening, actually. And hopefully emotional for those watching for the right
Oh, I
reasons. But
think so.
but it
It
was
was
lovely.
so lovely
Yeah.
for us, because obviously, like, your experience was the same as that for so many comedians who hadn't been out and done a gig in months and months. So we felt really lucky, like we got to kind of share that experience with so many acts of coming back. Like Alex Keeley did one of our drive-in shows, and I don't think I've ever seen a performer so fizzy after they came off stage. Like he just missed it so much. And it was so lovely to see, not just with Alex, like with you, so many acts, how much it meant to them. And it certainly helped that, as you said, they were such a lovely gigs. We always get great audiences and that kind of thing.
It's also lovely to see, so people that you hadn't seen for a while. So I haven't seen you for a while. Obviously, I
Yeah.
know Alex and Harry quite well, but I hadn't seen them for a while. Chelsea was on the bill, and just watching people who, I mean, everyone, everyone on the bill, um, are great comics. So there's never been any doubt about that. But just also watching how people sort of progress. So,
Yeah.
watching
Yeah.
how kind of Alex emceed that night, watching how Chelsea blew the lack of roof off, was just so lovely to see. I was like, God, it's so nice to see sort of comics that you've seen, sort of, who started a bit later than you did, and you suddenly are like,
Yeah.
God, any one of those comics would give me a total run for my money on any bit of the circuit. So it's kind of amazing to see how much people's comedy develops as well, and you miss that when you don't see
Yeah.
people. So I also just loved watching everyone else and just sort of getting blown away by how good everybody was.
Oh, that's so
So
great.
yeah, it was a real. So I think that's the bit we miss, isn't it? Is watching other people's comedy
Yeah.
develop as well
Yeah.
as developing our own. It's weird being a comedian in a vacuum. That's not really the most hilarious setting in which to try and be comedic, is it?
Yeah. How did you find those Zoom gigs? I mean, I didn't do any. I sort of decided to try, or to try to get one like after gigs came back, which was a really dumb time for me to try to get into Zoom gigs because nobody cared about them by then.
Yeah,
Uh
what was your I'm more interested in your rationale. I was like, when we have to do Zoom, I'm not interested, but once we can do normal shit, get me on the Zoom
I don't
ladder.
know.
So
Like I
what were
spoke
you
to
thinking?
I spoke to a few people and they were like, "Oh yeah, there are some really good ones and some really bad ones." And I was like, "How can they be different? Like I don't understand." And sort of then watched a couple and I was like, "Oh, I'd quite like to try this out." But by the time I got round to, I mean, I am the laziest comic on the circuit, to the point where I feel even a bit icky calling myself a comic because I just don't gig regularly enough, I think, to justify calling myself that. Um so yeah, mine was just born out of pure laziness. But obviously this is what you do, so you had to kind of get involved with the whole Zoom scene.
Well, it was funny because the stuff, when in our deepest, darkest moments, when because most of us have at least one other life as well as being a comic, don't we?
Mm.
And I guess even the absolute big league comics, the same. They'll be focusing on telly or radio and
Hmm.
live. So my other sort of normal thing that I do a lot of and love doing is I do lots of keynote and after dinner speaking and public speaking,
Hmm.
sort of playing into the fact that I used to have a sort of reasonable business career, and now obviously I'm a belatedly reinvented comic. And so and whenever I'm in sort of doubt as to why I'm doing comedy, which I think all of us have, maybe, I don't know, a couple of times a year or something, when a couple of things go wrong and you think, I've got all that driving around and not earning anything and the risk of dying on my arse. So when I have those sort of darker moments about myself, I always think, well, it definitely makes me better at all the other things I do. So I'm a way better corporate speaker because I'm a comedian. It makes me loads better. But
Yeah.
also, I don't know how this is because you and I are slightly different age demographics, but at my sort of stage in life, which makes me sound very elderly, and I'm not, but I'm middle aged, and in middle age, it's very easy for your world to get quite small. And I watch
Mm.
people sort of suddenly they're just not out at as many things. They live in a nice place. They don't go to gigs. They don't. I'm generalising. There are exceptions to this, but there's a
Sure, sure.
tendency for the world to get quite small in midlife, and I really, really don't want that to be the case for myself. I want to be out there meeting people and doing things that aren't things in my immediate sphere of reference. So
Mm.
I think for me that the reason I carried on doing Zoom gigs without even questioning it was a sort of humility about my standing as a comic. I just think, I'm still only 5 years in, which is still quite new. And
Yeah.
I can't not gig for 6 months and still think that I'll know my material, know my sort of voice. But it was also a sort of sort of in the keeping of trying stuff. I was like, well, if that's what there is available, who am I not to sort of cut my teeth on something that's quite different? And also, I was getting corporate bookings on Zoom, and if you can do a comedy gig on Zoom, you can definitely do a decent corporate booking. So I was also thinking, well,
Yeah, of
if
course,
I
yeah.
can manage to face the demons of comedy on Zoom, I'll certainly be able to keep sort of some jaded, telecom engineers happy or whatever I was doing. So yeah, it was more sort of it was kind of sort of being curious, I guess, about what was out there, and also being massively insecure about myself as a comedian, thinking I better keep cracking on or I'll lose it completely.
It's such a great attitude and I mean, I think it's one of the best qualities any person can have, but especially a creative person, is to be curious and to keep trying new things. And you do talk about how you decided you kind of took the step to do stand up when you were in your like mid 40s after you developed a really successful career. And your story about the reason why you took that first step into stand up is better than anyone else's I've ever heard. I mean, it's
You've
quite
really built it
incredible.
up now.
I think the story lives
There'll be
up
people
to it,
going, "What
Cally.
was it? Did you did you get shot up to the moon and try your first gig in the Apollo space
Kind of
station?"
comedically close enough to that. I mean,
I was a comedy moonshot. Yeah, yes, I mean, this is a terribly name droppy story, but yes, I was working. You've obviously done your research, but I worked in television most of my career, and I worked in various different sort of comedy areas of telly, and I worked with Comedy Central, particularly in the US, for quite a long time. And I was just sort of a business person, so I worked generating kind of revenue from shows
mhm.
and TV formats. So I was kind of a little bit creative because I had to see what might make money and sort of have a nose for something editorially strong. But at the end of
Mm.
the day, I was not a cool, sexy, creative person. I was there to generate revenue and sell shit. But I did get to meet some amazing on and off screen talent as part of that job. And one of the people I was lucky enough to get to meet was the late great Joan Rivers, and I sort of introduced her to the stage a few times at corporate events. We had a couple of dinners together, and then the last time I saw her, which was not long before she died, sadly, she
Mm.
was the one who said I should take up stand up. And I said, I'm 45. It's too late. I've got a massive day job. I'm a single mum. The ship sailed, and she at the time was 81, and she said, when you're my age, you're going to look back at yourself at 45 and think, God, why didn't I do that? So it's funny, and how it took an 81-year-old telling me at 45 that I was young and I could try shit. And I'm so glad, only 5 years on that someone did, because now we're 5 years on, I think, yeah, of course at 45, do anything you bloody want.
Yeah.
So it's always in my mind, even sort of, I say even now, I turned 51 in lockdown, and it is tempting on the one hand to go, God, that sounds like quite a big number for an age. But another bit of me thinks, but says who? Like, why?
Yeah.
Who cares? I don't feel very different. So when I was 21, so I sort of I like the idea, and this is maybe relevant. I'm actually writing a book on this topic at the moment,
Oh, wow.
and grappling with what the angle is going to be exactly. But my belief about reinvention, and lots of people, God knows, are going to have to reinvent because of this this irritating little virus.
Yes.
I think we often think with career reinvention or life reinvention, we sometimes think that we'll do it through necessity, or maybe we'll downsize. Okay, I've got to reinvent, so I'll sell everything and I'll go and be a sort of lavender farmer or whatever. Not that there'd be anything wrong with that, but
Sure.
I think you can go. I sort of reinvented at a time in life when women in particular are meant to get a bit invisible, and I sort of reinvented and went bigger and bolder, and took with me the stuff I could do in the TV world and tried to
Yeah.
bring it into a new career, which was obviously more the corporate speaking side of what I do. So I
Mhm.
suppose that if there's one thing, and being honest, I'm finding this pandemic as hard as anyone. I've lost most of my work, and it's caused huge problems for me and my immediate sort of family and loved
Yeah.
ones,
Yeah.
like most people listening. But what I would say is I also do think that out of this very odd time where we're having to reassess, I'm not underestimating how many people are literally struggling to sort of pay a bill and put food on the table for themselves or their kids or whatever. So I'm not trying to minimize that. But I do also think that some possibilities may emerge where in years to come, people will say, God, if I hadn't had to take a different fork in the road at that time, I might never have done this. So I suppose I have a combination of feeling enormously insecure and that I'll never work again, and thinking, but actually anything is possible at any point in your life. You
Yeah.
just don't know. So there you go. You didn't expect to get Oprah Winfrey on your podcast, but that's what you just had.
It's absolutely amazing, and I totally agree. I mean, I'm a huge believer in transferable skills. Like, I've had quite a varied career, and I'm just banking on the idea that there's no such thing as bad experience, that everything that I've done I'll be able to take something from. And like, there have been points where I've shied away from certain aspects of my CV and job interviews, and kind of almost been apologetic for them. Like, oh no, but I never really wanted to do that. I really want to be here. But now I'm kind of at the stage where I'm sort of like, yeah, like everything I've done has made me more creative or a better project manager, whatever I've done. So I'm really, really interested to hear about how that's worked for you. And I've read that you said something really interesting in an interview I read with you, where you said that to be a good performer on stage, or a sympathetic performer, I guess, you had to kind of unlearn some things that business kind of taught you.
Yeah, that's definitely it's interesting, isn't it? Because all the things that I did, I ended up in my first sort of boardroom when I was in my early 30s, because a small company, creative production company that I ran, got bought by Carlton, which is part of ITV, or was then big part of ITV. So I ended up sitting on the board, and it was a very odd experience for me. It wasn't what I was very ambitious, but I wasn't sort of board level ambitious. And it was interesting to end up, I think, because I had such raging imposter syndrome, not that I even knew what that was back then, and not that I'd have dared articulate it even to myself, but I was sort of a youngish woman. I was a single mum of two very small children. I was very much in the minority age-wise, and entirely in the minority gender-wise. And I just overcompensated massively, and sort of was highly successful on paper, and probably seemingly in the room was very successful. But I don't see that as a very successful time in my life, because it was a huge front. The gap between who I am and who I was pretending to be was massive. And I didn't have the capacity to see it or say it as I can now. But I was under enormous strain doing all of that. And it never occurred to me to sort of ask for help, or to say that things were difficult at home or at work. And it was really, and I, I sustained that. My kids are now in their 20s. I sustained that for a couple of decades. But all of that stuff where you don't show a chink in the armor at work, I think to get a funny sort of story, and again, I'm definitely a sort of an overthinky comedian. There'll be people listening going, well, that's a load of bollocks. You just tell a joke, and if people laugh, good on you, which is also entirely correct. But my way of presenting myself was quite slick. So my stagecraft was quite good because I'd been on stages the world over for many years. So I could sort of command a room and come across as quite a high status performer in my presence. But my actual voice, what I actually really think and who I really am is not at all like that. So I had to sort of work out how to, so it didn't all look disingenuous and bullshit. I had to sort of work out, well, what do I actually really think about these things that isn't just the glossy version I would give in a sort of boardroom presentation. So for me, it was definitely about sort of accepting my kind of flaws and vulnerabilities in a way I never had before. And maybe that is also a bit of an age thing. Maybe as you go through life, you sort of are more willing or more able to do that. I don't know. But it was definitely, I don't mean to keep banging on about age, but for me,
No.
I had to sort of unlearn the boardroom to be a good performer. So I think for me, what happened was I did very well at the beginning of my comedy career. So I sort of skyrocketed through the ranks for probably my first year. But I think that was based on stagecraft and the fact that I came across as a very polished performer. But my voice wasn't very strong in terms of, I think there's been a lot more creative people around me who've really mined their own voice and learned and haven't been able to hide behind stagecraft prematurely. So I think possibly I sort of plateaued a bit after the first year while I got my shit together a bit more. And now I think I'm sort of a bit more authentic as a comedian. So yeah, in answer to your original question, I think if you really sort of think you're bulletproof and you've got all the answers, and maybe that would work for some comics, but that isn't how I feel. So I don't think I'd be that funny if I was pretending that were the case. So my show, Super Cally Fragile Lipstick, which was two shows ago, was all about that. It was all about what's behind the lipstick, what's behind the smile, really. So yes, I think that's quite important. I don't know. Do you think so? Do you have a view about that?
I'm really obsessed with this idea at the minute, and it's something I feel very lucky doing these podcasts to get to speak to amazing acts like you who talk about what is kind of authentically them and finding that voice. And it's something I am still aspiring to. I spoke to, I don't know if you know Isa Bonachera.
No, I don't.
Isa, she's a wonderful Spanish comedian. She does quite a few shows for us at Jericho. And also I spoke to Tara Newton Wordsworth on the podcast last week. And actually they're both brilliant comedians, one Spanish, one Australian. And they both kind of say, like, the thing I could very easily spend all my time talking about is like, oh, I'm from here, and this is what people think of people from here, and this is what we think of you from the outside. But actually, they want to talk about the stuff that's really interesting to them. And I heard that as a comedian who spent most of my stage time so far being like, oh, I'm Irish, and you all think this of Irish people. And suddenly I've kind of realized recently, like, shit, I don't really care about that stuff. And like, I want to find the things that I really care about and talk about those on stage. And I think when I watch you, that's something I really get. I mean, your comedy, it's very personal. It certainly seems quite unfiltered at times, and it's so brilliantly honest, or at the very least, you do a marvelous job at making it seem very honest, even if it's not.
Yeah, definitely. What I say is I definitely everything I say comes from something very real, and that does matter, and that I do have an opinion about. It's sometimes my starting point is what I actually think, and then by the time it becomes sort of properly as much as anything's bulletproof for us as stand-ups, but by the time it comes sort of a set piece and makes it into my sort of pro 20, it might be quite a long way from the starting point of truth. So it might well be not, I mean, I often talk on stage about being single still, mainly because, and I've been with someone for over a year now, and we're very happy together, but it sort of suits my persona more to be single. And, I'm not married, I don't live with anyone. So I feel like it's not completely bending the truth to still take that on.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that you do and I still work as an executive coach with people in businesses, and I'm doing a bit more of that in COVID than I have done beforehand because I've got a bit more time.
Yeah.
Well, not that I have done beforehand, but then I have done for many years. So I'm
Sure.
back into that a bit more. And it's funny because one of the things that you end up doing is you end up working out where you're actually at and what you actually think, but then the version of yourself you show, I'm quite carefully curated on stage. So I very much, if
Hmm.
I disclose something that's quite big, I will have very much made the conscious decision to disclose that. It won't be a kind of, it doesn't sort of slip out, and I'll
Yeah.
decide how to package it. So I do start with stuff I really have an opinion about and that matter, but then I work it onto the stage. Me on stage is definitely not the same me as you'd see backstage, as you probably know, because we're working
Yes. Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
So it's quite, I think some people are almost the same person, and I think I probably seem like the same person, but I'm not. There are things, I'm much shyer off stage for starters, obviously.
Uh-huh.
You're not going to go on stage and be like, I'm so shy, I can't speak to you. So yeah, I do think, but it's interesting what you say about your real opinion and what you actually really want to talk about, because I think it's really hard as a comic to, we tend to all start with similar things, don't we? Sex lives, work
Yeah.
life, what we look like, where we're from, talking about our kids or our parents, or
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
there's sort of common points, and then we start to get a bit more interesting, don't we, as we move on.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for you, when you were starting out, I guess you had the advantage of when you were starting comedy of having a bit more life experience, being a bit more mature. I don't mean in terms of age, I mean in terms of like outlook and knowing yourself that bit better. And so was this something that have you always been quite good at finding that balance between being truthful on stage but not giving away too much to the point where you're like, oh, I probably shouldn't have said that or wish I hadn't said that? Because that seems to me something that I've spoken to a few comedians where I think they've learned a little bit too late. Like I wasn't quite ready to talk about that, even if it's something absolutely fascinating. It
Yeah,
might just be a bit too soon for them. But have you made those mistakes, or have you always been quite disciplined?
I think because of I've made a lot of my living has been made out of, based on sort of some degree of I'm not saying I am hugely emotionally intelligent, but I've had to be
Hmm.
quite aware of emotional intelligence for lots of the things I've done. So the way I mainly, the only thing I think I did well in my career in television was that I think I was good with people. I knew how to manage people, and I knew how to influence people, and I mean, not in a cynical way, and build relationships. So I knew how to make people want to work with me and for me.
Hmm.
And I suppose that requires a degree of emotional intelligence. And then I studied, I did neurolinguistic programming masters years ago, and I started doing executive coaching and other things outside of my day job. So I think if there's a degree of emotional intelligence and awareness, and if you think that's important in your life, then I suppose you're quite aware of yourself. So then you're probably aware of how you come across, or certainly what you might want to and not want to say. So there are
Mm.
things, I did a show, I think it was when I did a double header with Catherine Bohart, Cat Call. I think that was the one where I talked a lot about my son's autism. And
Hmm.
people thought when I did that, God, you've really shared a lot. And actually, I shared very little about my son specific. I did share some things about his interests, but you wouldn't
Hmm.
really have known my son from that show. And I certainly would never, if there was no punching down, but if anyone was the butt of any jokes, it was never him. It was always
Yeah.
me or someone else. So it probably seemed like an extremely generous share about a very intimate relationship, i.e., with my son. But
Yeah.
actually, there was nothing in there that wasn't really consciously crafted to be appropriate a level of sharing for me. So there are things that I really wouldn't talk about that happened between me and him, and there were things I was happy to put in a comedy show. And the Venn diagram between the two was probably minimal overlap, actually. So yeah, I think I think I was quite aware as to what I did and didn't want to say, and I'm a bit like that. Backstage as well, I can be a bit not private, but there's things I just don't really want to tell everybody, because why
Yeah,
would
of
I?
course. Yeah.
But I don't know. Do you
Yeah.
find that did you find that getting? Because how old were you when you got into comedy?
I think I did my first set when I was 28 or just about to turn 28.
So that's the complete other end of the scale. I mean, I know there are comedians who start out, 10 years younger than that, but
Yeah,
but that must
yeah.
have been a very different experience, because I guess you were still not finding your adult voice, but you're still sort of
No,
growing
no,
up
I,
at
I
28,
think
aren't
very
you?
much so, and something as well, like increasingly so recently, and I guess having had a bit of time to think about it over lockdown, uh, and starting these podcasts and having these conversations, I'm thinking about it more than ever. Is that idea of what matters to me, and it's a tricky thing because like I have some bits that over the last few years I've developed, and I know they're reliable. Like I know that the basic function of the job is to go out and make people laugh. And if I say these things, I can make people laugh. But whether I care about them as much as I did when I wrote them 3 years ago, that's the bit that I don't really know now. And I think I now have more of a desire to talk about some things. Like mental health is a big thing that I talk about a lot off stage. I do quite a bit of like mental health kind of campaigning and advocacy, that type of thing, because I've lived with depression, but I have nothing on that on stage. I've not made that funny yet. And then seeing someone like Chelsea Birkby do what she does and speaks about
She's
mental
so
health
good, isn't
so
she? Yeah.
incredibly in that
She is.
area.
Yeah, she's brilliant. Well, I think
Yeah.
I think she's full stop brilliant. But yeah, the stuff she does in that area is, and she's an example of somebody who I think from the start mined her own authentic voice. Funnily, she didn't go for a sort of
Yes.
quick. She didn't go for the easy gag. She was like, I'm going
Yeah.
to find a way to do this, and I think she's hugely impressive. On stage and off in that regard. Was it you who posted? I know for Mental Health Awareness Day, was it you who posted about sertraline? Or was that
Oh
not
yeah.
you?
Well,
Yeah.
I posted something very recently for World Mental Health Day about about medication and sertraline, venlafaxine, and now I'm
Yeah.
a mirtazapine
Yeah.
man. Yeah, but finding the right one, yeah, it took me quite a while to
Yeah,
find
because
the
I
right
was on
medication.
sertraline for a bit. Yeah,
Oh
I didn't
yeah.
start my sort of my chemical exploration. I didn't think I'd ever suffered from depression until I first did, actually not that long ago, in my late 40s, and
Oh yeah.
I then realised perhaps I had suffered from it in quite a lot of different ways in my life, but never
Yeah.
called it that. But it became unignorably bad, or bad. That makes it sound like it's something wrong. It became unignorable in
Sure.
my late 40s, and the first antidepressant that I tried was sertraline, which I think is possibly, I don't know if it still is, but I think at the time was very much the NHS go-to. Right, you need
That's it. Yeah.
antidepressants, let's give you
Exactly.
sertraline, which didn't work
Yeah.
for me either. But I think when you do get the chemical balance right, it can be really transformative. And I think lots of there probably are. Well, I know there are lots of comedians with a little bit of help being given from the old antidepressants. I don't think
Yeah.
it's that unusual in our profession.
Certainly, yeah. It's a funny thing to kind of try to make those things that feel very difficult funny, and obviously, like you said, with your son being autistic, for example, that isn't always going to be a picnic. But the way you spoke about it on stage, it was never difficult to hear about it, and you did find that separation between, as you said, stuff you wouldn't say on stage because it's private, obviously, and stuff that was okay to say about it. With something like your kind of recent mental health experience that you've just mentioned, is that something that again you would want to go through that same process of trying to find what feels okay for you to talk about, or is it something that maybe you just don't you're not particularly drawn to as a potential kind of vein of comedy?
I've done it. I did talk about it in the Super Cally show two
Oh
years
yes,
ago.
of
I
course,
did
yeah.
talk about it, but not. I mean, it was definitely a part of it, and I did specifically talk about antidepressants and depression, and
Hmm.
I did a bit about, people who'll be like, oh, I'd never take antidepressants, or why are you doing that, people who are quite judgmental about antidepressants. And I
Yeah,
did a bit
yeah.
that was basically about kind of a kind of funny version of, you don't exactly do that as you go to, like, by the time you're taking antidepressants, you have thought about a few other options. No one's like, whoa, when can I start my antidepressants, mum? I'm nearly at secondary school, is it time yet? So I kind of so I did a bit about that, which was really a bit of a kickback against people who are so judgmental about how you treat depression. And
Yeah.
then I did it's funny because I haven't I was diagnosed as being bipolar only 4 years ago.
Right.
And
Right.
which is kind of like, and a lot of my family are bipolar, so it isn't on both sides. So probably not a great surprise, but I
Sure.
didn't think, and I still struggle to think, well, am I what I think someone with bipolar is? And then I think, well, that's terrible, really, because I'm still looking at stereotypes and judging the words, judging the diagnosis of
God,
bipolar,
yeah,
even with
yeah.
regard to myself. And I've thought about, I don't really talk about it a huge amount, even off stage. It's obviously quite personal, even
Mm.
though I'm now talking about it in a very
Sure.
unpersonal space. But we are talking about mental health, and I know you've got the links to mind and so on. So I do think it's important
Yes.
to be honest about that stuff as well. And so yeah, I don't know how. The thing I'm most aware of, so I'm a newbie bipolar person. So as in, I may not be new to having it, but I'm new to knowing about it, and
Yeah.
to having it as a sort of badge that I understand has something to do with me. What
Hmm.
I'd be very wary of is having a sort of is in any way inadvertently being really disrespectful of or dismissive of something that is so important and so
Mm.
central to so many people's lives, either because they are bipolar or they've got loved ones or close people who are. So I'm just really wary of knowing my shit, not just what I think about it, but what would be
Yeah.
appropriate. Because, of course, in an audience, if I talk about autism, there'll be many people in the audience with a connection to autism, and the same, I
Yeah.
imagine, would apply to bipolar. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what, if you'd feel the same. I don't know how. It's hard to know how you broach it without potentially really making people feel a bit inadequate, I guess.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating area, and it's and that's a very considered way to approach it, that you've spoken
I'm
of
also really
there.
bad at writing jokes, and I only knew 4 years ago, and it would take me 5 to write a good joke. That's what I'm saying. I just got no good shit on it yet, but I'm
That
trying.
that's the thing that, like, I know I've spoken at kind of various, like, events for Movember and that kind of thing about mental health, and I've shared stuff online, and I'm always floored by the responses I get from people, kind of privately and kind of publicly, about their own experiences, and it's always really humbling. And like, yeah, I mean, the reason I do it is because it, I think it does help people. The responses I get from people are always very kind and say, I didn't know this, or I can relate to this. And it's really made me think about whatever it may be that we're talking about. Um, so I feel relatively confident, having lived with depression, I think, for probably kind of 7 or 8 years, but really it's only been diagnosed for the last kind of 5 or so. Um, but I've lived with it for, a not insubstantial portion of my life. And so I do feel relatively confident that I can speak about it with some degree of authority, albeit every single person experiences mental health difficulties in unique ways. So I'm always keen to stress my experience of mental health isn't going to be the same for everybody else, or indeed possibly anybody else. But I do think hearing, even if there are nuggets, even if there's one thing that you've experienced that someone else in the audience might be able to relate to, in a talk that might last 5-10 minutes or whatever, if there's just one little thing, then I sort of think it's worth it. But it is that thing of, it's like, it's also high risk. I mean, you have to remember, as comedians, it's great for us to talk about the things we care about, but the bread and butter of comedy, I suppose, is like people come out for a good time and often to forget about their troubles. So how much of that do you want to bring on stage and find that balance, I guess?
It's also, I think, not putting yourself forward. I think whenever we talk about things on stage, it's really helpful for us to have some idea. You can never guess on that particular night, but to have some idea, is this thing I'm talking about really very relatable? Is this really very unique to me? And I
Mm,
do think as well, because depression and anxiety and mental health problems are so rife, so many
mm-hmm.
people in the audience will have had. So there's no great excitement in going, oh, I'm bipolar, or I've had depression and anxiety, because so many people will be like, yeah, and what of it? Because it's so common and so prevalent in society. So I think you've also got to think, well, what am I bringing to this then? What am I saying that is
Yeah,
in
yeah.
some way funny, unique, interesting? I do think when I had quite a lot of treatment in a psychiatric hospital when I first had some really kind of severe depression, and then again a year later. So I had
Mm,
a lot of group therapy in this same hospital. So 1 year, and then for weeks and weeks, 1 year, every day, full time every day. I was a day patient for weeks. And then the
Yeah.
following year, I had another spell. And I will say that I have never laughed as much, and obviously cried as much, but I've never laughed as much as I did in those group sessions and with those people. And I don't know what you would describe it as, whether it is a kind of gallows humor, but
Yeah.
I've still got some really dear friends from that time. And there was something about the desperation and the surreal situation we were in, that even though lots of us were literally battling to want to keep going on the most fundamental level, there was something
Yeah.
really funny about it as well. So, I mean, I literally used to laugh every day until my face hurt and my stomach hurt, and lots of us did.
Oh, wow.
It just, in terms of the contact between us, it wasn't that obviously if you're in a group session and someone was having some awful thing happen, nobody was like fizzling themselves. We weren't inappropriate, but there was something about the link between us all, because obviously we're all just whatever normal is. We're just normal people who can see, on the
Yeah.
one hand, the absurdity of what was going on for us, and on the other hand, could not get out of its grip. So there was something very funny about that period, genuinely very funny. And I think probably that would be my angle on it, would be the sort of the kind of the kind of intensity of the good and the bad of that experience. So yeah, certainly
Yeah.
laughter was a big part of my depression, actually, and possibly, I don't know if it is for people when they're on their own. I mean, I think the group therapy made it really different, because there was a band of not very merry people
Sure.
instead of doing it on your own. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
that there's something that laughter and depression are kind of easy bedfellows, I think.
Yeah. God, absolutely. It's I just it's an endlessly fascinating area to me. Like, I think even if I hadn't lived with kind of mental health problems, I think it's just endlessly fascinating. Yeah. The one
Is that
experience.
why Jericho works with, sorry, just cut straight through you on
Oh,
your
no,
own
no, it's
podcast.
quite all right.
Is
Uh,
that why Jericho, so because Jericho does a lot with mind. I know
yeah.
I think I've done one of your benefits. And what's the link between Jericho and mind? Is
It's
that to do with your own
something
personal thing or
It's
not?
actually nothing to do with me, because I'm very lucky that Alex and Harry kind of brought me into the Jericho fold after they'd made such a success of it. So I just get to piggyback off their achievements. But it was something when Alex and Harry first started running gigs together. I mean, they were both students in Oxford at the time, or at least Harry was a student and Alex may have just graduated. But they were running gigs in college bars around Oxford, and that's kind of how this iteration of Jericho Comedy was sort of born. Um, and they knew they wanted to run them as kind of charity events, because they're both very considerate, very kind guys. And yeah, that I spoke to them a little bit about it on a previous episode of the podcast when I had them both on together. And they kind of just said they took all the issues that they sort of cared about and that they thought people in comedy cared about, and they made a big list. And the only thing that really felt right for them was mental health charities. Particularly, I guess, the fact that they were going into a lot of Oxford colleges as well, where there's so much pressure. And, Oxford and Cambridge and, some of those kind of top universities, probably more than any other, it's fair to say, have disproportionate numbers of students who experience difficult mental health situations. And so I think that
Yeah.
that was a big part of why they felt the need to support those. But obviously, I mean, as they've gone on and as the years have gone on, mental health funding has been so, um, well, just inexplicably poor. There is a genuine mental health crisis.
We're very aware of, increasingly we're aware of the mental health toll that this is taking on us all. But even at the most sort of basic level, I
Hmm.
don't know if you've noticed it, but living in fairly central London as I do, in Camden,
Mm.
I'm pretty sure there are now people on the street who are in, I mean, I think there always have been lots of, the link between mental ill health and homelessness is obviously well
Hmm.
documented and, very, very sort of connected. But I just think there are so many people that just are at the most desperate end of needing care for their mental well-being and just aren't getting it, let alone people who maybe are coping, but it would be more of a luxury item to get some help with it.
Yeah.
So I think that
Yeah.
we're probably going to see quite a long-term effect on people's mental health and the capacity of the state to sort of cope with that. So I think it's a real, watching my kids, who are at the sort of young end of going through this, and
Mm.
friends of mine at my age, I don't think anyone's really spared this. So I do think it's interesting to think whether it's, as it was for Alex and Harry, thinking, well, yeah, uni kids, traditionally and particularly at Oxbridge, have been under a lot of pressure and may struggle. But I do think there's a massive struggle going on across the piece at the moment, really. And I don't think, and everyone's on their own dealing with it. It's a bit shit, isn't it?
I think that sums it up very nicely. It is a bit shit.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's why, charities like Oxfordshire Mind, they are so heroic. And yes, I love being associated with Jericho Comedy. I'm very proud to be associated with it, but I can't take anywhere near as much credit as Alex and Harry deserve. And Chelsea, of course, is a trustee of Oxfordshire Mind as well. Those guys are legit heroes, and people like you who give up your time to work with us to help us raise money for Oxfordshire Mind as well. It's incredibly kind. And this would seem like a fairly opportune moment to play a little message from our wonderful friends at Oxfordshire Mind. So have a little listen to this.
Are you caring for someone and struggling to cope?
Suffering with low mood or feeling anxious?
Experiencing discrimination and not sure of your options?
You are not alone. Did you know that you can ask to speak to an Oxfordshire Mind wellbeing worker through your local GP practice? A wellbeing worker can help you to identify what is important to you, offer time, space and support for you to work out the positive changes you want to make, and support you to reach those goals. Tell you about relevant services you can access to improve your wellbeing and support you with making referrals. Our service is currently available over the phone to anyone registered with a participating GP practice in the City and South West Oxfordshire. For more information, please ask at your GP practice or call the Oxfordshire Mind information line on 01865 247 788.
All right, Cally, Jericho Comedy is a warm, friendly comedy club where acts always have a lovely time, but I'm sorry to say that's not the vibe of this next section. It's now time for pressing questions, a series of challenging, thought-provoking, intensely difficult questions. All I need from you, Cally, are some honest answers. Can you do that for us?
Sounds a bit like PMQs. Is it a bit like that? And if so, are you Starmer or Johnson? That's what I want to know.
I do have a ridiculous head of hair at the moment, so I'm unfortunately going to have to say I'm the Johnson figure here.
Okay, well, rather you than me identifying
yeah.
with
I'm taking the hit on this one. You can be Keir Starmer.
I'm a very well-qualified barrister. Throw anything at me and I'm ready.
All right, Cally, see how you deal with this. Question 1. What's your least favourite chore?
Oh, that's got to be anything toilet related. What I would say is I spent first 2-3 months of lockdown with my 23-year-old son and my 59-year-old boyfriend, and I did think of an age when a man knows to put the toilet seat down after he's pissed on the rim. So anything to do with clearing up men's piss off the rims of toilets. Say it's not my favourite chore.
I think that would be a very popular answer. If this were like Family Fortunes or something, I think that's the top of the screen there.
Respect to all the men listening who are like, I never piss on the rim. Good for you. By all means, please come and live here instead of the people I live with who do. So I'm aware not all men do that, but the men I'm with in this house do that.
I'm one of the proud pissers. I always put the seat down, but
proud pissing. You should do something about that.
A proud pisser, yeah. It definitely sounds like something I should speak to someone about. Can you name 3 actors who have played Batman on film?
God, I'm really bad at. I'm a BAFTA voting member, so I should not be admitting to how bad I am at remembering actors' names. I don't think I can even. Hold on. I can see one of them. The most recent. Oh, what's his name? This is really gripping. Bit of audio. What? I can't even remember one. No, I'm just going to go no. I can't
just
remember any.
Just say no. That is also
no.
A perfectly acceptable answer. Not everybody has spent their life learning the Batman actors like I have. And that's okay.
Because I do actually like superhero. I have watched every superhero movie going because my son loves them. So I've watched every Batman incarnation. So the fact I can't remember any of them is shocking. So go on, tell me 3 of them.
Oh my goodness, 3 of them. Michael Keaton, Christian Bale, Ben Affleck, George
didn't-
Clooney, Adam West.
Only play him.
George Clooney was in the worst Batman film ever, Batman and Robin. It was very campy. It was the one that got a lot of attention because the Batsuit was given nipples.
Oh yes, and who was Robin in that?
That was Chris O'Donnell.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, the only one I could place, and I couldn't come up with a name, was Michael Keaton. That was the one I could see, but I couldn't name him.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I think that if anyone from BAFTA is listening, they can strip me of my voting privilege. That was disgraceful.
If you ever need a second opinion on a Batman film, I've got some strong ones. So if they're ever up for an award,
In
have a
your voice.
word.
They're not up for an award, but when they are, I'll call you.
Cally, who, in your opinion, is the funniest person in the world?
Oh, that's a really good question. The person I think is the most talented person in the world, in a comedic way, is Stephen Colbert. So we work. He does the Late Show.
Yeah.
But we did the Colbert Report with him on Comedy Central for years, which was his kind of alter ego. So it was kind of him being a fake version he now is. And he is, so I've seen him do his stuff live lots of times when he was still with us at Comedy Central. And I don't know if you watch them, but anybody listening who doesn't watch either Seth Meyers' Closer Look or Stephen Colbert Late Show, they're monologues, which they do 4 nights a week whenever they're not on break. And they're so good. But Colbert, who trained with the Upright Citizens Brigade and Second City and was in Saturday Night Live, he's just so, when you look at what he does, and we're trying to knock out a sort of strong new 10 minutes, and it might take us 18 months to get it right. He's doing 12 minutes every night, and his capacity to sort of like inhabit the different voices and I just watch his monologues. I'm like, oh my God, you're just a genius. So I suppose, is he the funniest person in the world? I don't know, but he probably is comedically the most talented person, I would say.
That's a brilliant answer. He and Steve Carell did one of the best sketches I've ever seen. Like, the premise of it is so simple. It was the waiters who are made sick by the sound of food, and so they're just reading out this menu to a customer, and just both of them becoming increasingly nauseated the more they have to describe like the truffles. And it's just such a funny bit. But yes, absolutely, Colbert, total genius. That is an excellent answer.
Yeah, and watching what they did in lockdown as well, watching how they, if you think it was hard us doing stuff on Zoom, them doing stuff from their homes, and even now they're doing it without audiences, but they're back in studio. But they had just weeks and months of doing this really funny stuff from home. So it was, it was a bit of a lesson to me. So I do think he's a master. He provides a masterclass in how to do it every night he does something, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Superb answer. Cally, what is your go-to chocolate bar?
Well, I'm off sugar at the moment.
Oh my goodness.
Boringly, yes, I stopped it in sugar once I'd gained the lockdown stone that people gained. I was like, oh, I don't like this. But normally, I'm going to probably say Toblerone, because I like a Toblerone, old school, but also my dad loves the Toblerone. And whenever I see a Toblerone, I always think of my daddy.
Oh.
So I'd say it's the sort of thing that I like, and I like it because he likes it.
Oh, that's a wonderful answer. Cally, if you bought a boat, what would you call it?
Ooh, what would I call it? Well, I used to, when I was an underage barmaid, which I was that's how I paid my way through sixth form college. So from 16 to 18, so I wasn't underage the whole time, but I was an underage barmaid during sixth form. And I can't remember why, but there were all these old sort of codgers who would sit at the bar and they would have their own tankards, and I would know them and I would give them their beers. And for some reason, instead of telling them my name was Cally Beaton, I said my name was Patsy Beak. And I don't know why I said that. But anyway, they thought my name was Patsy Beak. So I think I would call it, I would call her the Patsy Bee.
That is a great name. That's brilliant. If you ever have develop another character or a comedic alter ego,
Patsy
I really
Beak.
want to see barmaid Patsy Beak.
Yeah, I know.
stage.
It was. I don't know what possessed me really, but anyway, there you go. So yeah, Patsy Beak, I think should make a comeback.
Excellent. Great name for a boat. Cally, my final question for you is, if you could have a day out with Stephen Fry, what would you do?
Well, if I could have a my son is a huge Stephen Fry fan, and obviously Stephen Fry did Last Chance to See, which was brilliant series, and there's a book of it about various creatures that were close to extinction. And because my son is a zookeeper, an autistic zookeeper and wannabe zookeeper, because he's like lots of people lost his job, so he is no longer a zookeeper, but he's very much hoping to return to it and is studying animals again at the moment. I would do something with him, so I would go with Stephen Fry and my son, and I probably, if Stephen Fry were amenable, would say, my son knows quite a lot of stuff about animals, can we pick a place to go together where you and my son can talk about animals, and I will just be the Dumbo listening. So I would be the sort of I would pimp Stephen Fry out for my son, and I think he'd be delighted with that as a nice little day out. And I'd make the sandwiches and everything.
Stephen Fry would love that, I'm sure. That sounds like a great day out.
He would,
and sandwiches as well. Who would say no to that?
Exactly. And they could talk about the cockapoo, not the cockapoo, the I can't remember what it's called. It's not the cockapoo. There's a bird, kakapo, the kakapo, which is a weird bird that there's quite a funny bit. Anyone who hasn't seen Last Chance, if you Google Stephen Fry kakapo, you'll see quite a funny bit with him and the strange lumpen kakapo bird. And I think my son and he could probably talk about that for about 3 hours, and then have an egg and cress sandwich. It'd be a lovely day.
Fantastic. I know I'm going to be Googling Stephen Fry kakapo after this. That sounds like great fun.
Because that is, as we know, a hybrid dog.
Yes, yeah. Well, there we go. Here at Jericho Comedy, we're all about delivering a fantastic range of different types of shows. Stand-up, themed shows, improvised shows, online shows, and now podcasts. In addition to this, the Jericho Comedy Podcast, we have another wonderful podcast called The Dinner Party. In each episode, I speak to a fascinating guest to hear all about their dream dinner party. I want to know the venue, the menu, and the guest list. It's so much fun hearing from these people about why they'd invite their fantasy guests, who they are, how they've inspired that person, and what the conversation might go like. Here's a clip from a recent episode featuring a comedian who's appeared on Live at the Apollo, Mock the Week, and The MASH Report. He's the voice of conservative Britain. Here is the fantastic Jeff Norcutt introducing us to one of his dream dinner party guests. And your next guest, again, is someone who's another complex figure. He was part of the crazy gang from Wimbledon in the 80s and 90s, later became a TV presenter. You got John Fashanu coming to the dinner party.
Big Fash, yeah. I mean,
you grew up in Wimbledon, didn't you? So you were a Wimbledon fan, I'm assuming?
Yeah, I went through that journey with that side, around 86 and through winning the cup. And Fash was around for a few years after that as well. Unlike a lot of he did stay at the club for a while.
When I was reading about him today, he sounds like he was mad. Like,
no, he's a
violent, temperamental.
Yeah.
Crikey.
So he was quite a violent player. He took out quite a few people. Gary Stevens involved in that Vinnie Jones tackle where him and Vinnie. I mean, who wants to be on the end of that? Vinnie Jones and sandwiched Gary
brutal.
Stevens in a tackle. He also took out Gary Mabbott's eye socket with an elbow.
Yeah. I saw the photo earlier.
He's underrated as a player. I think he was devastating in the air, and I always think footballers that can head a ball are underrated because it's essentially a volley with your face, isn't it? Like the bravery of it doesn't get enough credit.
Yeah. And do you think he deserved more kind of England caps than he got? He only got the 2.
He got the 2, yeah. No, is the truth. I think that I just don't think that he suited. The way that Wimbledon played at the time was perfect for Fash, but I don't think the way that England played would have ever suited.
Sure.
Now, I suppose the closest to him would have probably been Shearer in a way, which was very good in the air. If you get service into Shearer like that, and also Fash was quite good from distance. Where he didn't have much game was one-on-one finishing. He was very bad.
In 2007, the Times named him the 22nd in the list of 50 worst players ever to have played in the Premiership. Do you think that's harsh?
That's wrong. I mean, I'm just going to say that is not correct. He had a great record from the penalty spot, almost up there with Matt Letitia. And he played. Yeah, I think that is. I think if you were talking about most divisive figures, or wrongs, like you can make an argument for that. I think as a player, I think sometimes that's just a bit of a simplistic reading of his kind of persona and what he did on the pitch. I could show you like some of the goals he scored from distance were exceptional. But he's a confusing guy. He's been in with his brother, and the legacy of how he treated his brother when his brother came out. It's dodgy, man.
Yeah, like it's it's very difficult to sugarcoat it. Like he was very cruel about that. There was also the match fixing scandal. I know charges were dropped, but yeah, he's a complex guy to say the least. Like, what would you want to pick his brain about if you had him there at your dinner party?
I just want to know what is going on. Also, he was involved in a corruption, a bribery scale, which he got acquitted of when I was a Wimbledon fan. But he was accused that he'd taken money to throw football matches. Now, a bit of context: when I was about 14, 15, for some reason I was able to write reports for the local newspaper. But I said in a report. Was John Fashanu trying to throw away the points, the ball, or both after he'd handled the ball for a penalty once already and did it again in the 90th minute? Now, I wasn't at that time thinking Fash has taken a bung here, but it went to court. And, certainly as Wimbledon fans, we could all remember times when Fash came back into the penalty area when he didn't need to and took out players. So yeah, I would just love to get a sense of the man. I'm not saying that he's a good human being. I'm just saying that I think you've got to have that firecracker in there, of a dinner party, and it could be Fash.
He's such an interesting character to choose because the temptation maybe for a lot of people would be to choose people that they just really like and would have a really nice relaxed evening with. But it sounds like you kind of want to mix things up and sort of challenge yourself almost a little bit with this guy here.
Yeah, I suppose I've always been like that. I don't think I don't like. I suppose like both my parents, which they were both complicated and challenging people in a way. So therefore, I think Fash, and I would love to see how Fash would be challenged by the people around him. It's worth saying as well. You mentioned earlier about him doing TV presenting. That was while he was still a footballer. So I think he was the first footballer to wear red boots as well. Sort of ahead of the game in a lot of ways. He also had one of the shittest catchphrases ever with a awooga. We'll remember from Gladiators.
From Gladiators, of course, yeah.
So he had something in him, but both him and his brother were they were orphans, so they came from Bernardo's home. So whatever difficulty is in him, partly came from he had a very, very tough upbringing. It's not to excuse all of it, but I maybe want to get him talking. What's the real Fash?
He's a fascinating choice, Jeff. I mean, definitely, I can see the appeal of having him there. He would be a brilliant person to kind of dig a little deeper into. All right, Cally, you're a very insightful person. You know people. You mentioned earlier you're emotionally intelligent. Indeed, you're a qualified life coach. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to help some of our regular Jericho Comedy audience members who have been in touch to tell us about some of their problems. Do you think you could offer a little bit of help?
Oh, no worries at all. I'm the person for the job. Yeah.
Excellent. Oh, well, thank you so much. All right. Well, Belle has been in touch. She says, I've been held captive in a castle by a hideous beast for a long time now. I miss my father and my previous life. Now my days are filled with talking to teapots, candlesticks, and clocks. I've also begun to feel complicated feelings toward my captor. Is this love or a classic case of Stockholm Syndrome?
Yeah, I'd say it's more being gaslit than love, Belle. And what I would say is that I think it's really important for us to rely on ourselves as women rather than teapots or beasts. Or perhaps the imprisonment is not actually a castle. Perhaps the imprisonment is you, Belle, needing to allow yourself to have the confidence of your own voice, the courage of your own convictions, and decide who is it you want to be in the world, and to break free of that imprisonment and not allow it to keep you down. So I think this is, for me, this is a feminist rally cry to not let a beast or a teapot gaslight you, Belle, because you are worth more than that.
That is extraordinary. That is a wonderful answer. Belle, if you're listening from the...
Is she allowed to listen? We don't know if that. Do they let her listen to this?
Oh, that's true. That's true. I don't know if there's a kind of walking, talking iPhone that lets Belle listen to the Jericho Comedy Podcast, but hopefully she can hear it, because that was some wonderful advice.
Yeah, she needs to go and kick ass.
Well, Cally, we've had a text in from the Cowardly Lion from the magical land of Oz. He says, I'm fed up with people calling me cowardly, but I'm too scared to challenge people who use the name. How do I find the courage to confront people? I mean, I'm a lion. Shouldn't I just eat anyone who annoys me?
Yeah, but you see, you can go for the sort of power, the sort of brute force approach. But once you've had the snack of the person that you were going to take on and actually build a proper sustaining relationship with, but you've eaten them, you probably feel great for, an hour, maybe 8 hours, and then you've digested the person and you're no further. So I think it's all got to be about long-termism in these relationships. And really, what you're doing is you're standing up for yourself. So it's not about can you overpower the other person, it's can you not let yourself overpowered by your own cowardice. So I would say, and this is what I used to say to my daughter when she was sort of, a teenage girl and coping with all the things that teenage girls cope with in society. I used to say it's about appropriate assertiveness. So just a little bit of how can I, because assertiveness is when you're okay and the other person is okay. So what would you say that is true to what you want to say, but doesn't diminish the other person? So I would probably work on being appropriately assertive rather than eating people who tell me I'm cowardly. But that's just me. That might be an old-fashioned approach, but that would be my...
I'm assuming that last part that you said about eating people, that wasn't part of the talk with your daughter. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, it generally wasn't. I mean, we touched on that very briefly. She seemed to think that wasn't part of the kind of culture of the sort of Camden School for Girls where she went. So we left that fairly quickly and just moved on to what is a way that a young woman can be appropriately assertive, and indeed a young man. But I hadn't ever thought of it from the perspective of a lion, but I can see it would when you were called cowardly all the time. So, and as somebody whose hair looks much like a lion, when it rains. Not a lion when it rains, but when it rains, my hair goes very 80s and I look a bit like a lion. So I relate to the fact that might be quite difficult. So yeah, appropriate assertion.
Appropriate assertion? I am going to be taking this away, Cally. I have just learned something from your advice to the Cowardly Lion.
Amazing.
This is wonderful.
Well, I never thought that's a sentence I'd hear being said in a podcast. In a global...
Only at Jericho Comedy. Well, Cally, the final message we have in, we got a message on Twitter from the Evil Queen. She says, I've got a mirror in my room that keeps telling me I'm only the second most beautiful person in the world. I guess it's quite a nice thing to say, but the mirror's tone is quite passive-aggressive. Should I kill the most beautiful person to shut my mirror up, or am I just leaning into the idea of nominative determinism?
I think you just go and get some Botox, just look about with what nature gave you, really buy into the whole beauty myth and, yes, get rid of all sense of who you actually are. No, I don't think you should do that. So I think really this is about what is the definition of beauty. Ooh. And if we're holding on to external beauty, at some point it will no longer be ours because we will age. And so I think it's really about deciding that, being the second is amazing, but actually even if you didn't score on the league of beautiful women, who cares? And also smashing that mirror on the ground and never asking it another question again.
Oh, here. It definitely sounds like the mirror was made by some kind of makeup company or something. It sounds like...
Or maybe it was made by Instagram, do you think? Where everything's got to look perfect.
Yeah. Which just banks on people feeling bad about themselves to fuel their business model.
I'm so glad there was no Instagram when I was a young person. I look at what my kids are looking at. I'm like, God, how does anyone live up to that? So yeah, I think she should treat it much like Instagram and engage with that mirror on her terms when she's ready to, and not be swayed by the nonsense within.
Oh, that is wonderful advice. Evil Queen, I hope that has helped you. Cally, thank you so much for some absolutely fascinating insights to our listeners' problems there.
My pleasure.
Thank you in general so much for giving up your time to be on the Jericho Comedy Podcast.
It's been lovely. Thank you for having me. It's been lovely having a natter, and best of luck to you lot. I'm always singing your praises to everybody.
Thank
Especially
you.
how you managed to come out of this lockdown with so many gigs and stuff. So yeah, more power to your elbows.
Oh, thank you so much, Cally. Well, we really hope to see you on stage at Jericho Comedy sometime in the very near future because we love having you along.
Oh no, me too. I haven't got much in my diary, so anytime I'll be yours.
Hey, we will be in touch. We will let our lovely listeners know when they can expect to see you because you're always such a hit. Cally, if any of our lovely listeners wanted to find out when and where you are gigging or if you're doing any online stuff or anything like that, how can our listeners stay across all things Cally Beaton?
Well, the theory is my website, so callybeaton.com, which in theory has all my gigs in, but I will be honest, I've not put a single gig in it in 6 months because I keep thinking I've not got enough to put on there, and I do now actually have enough to put on there. So that's not updated, but in theory, you can certainly see bits of me on QI and on The Apprentice and all that kind of shizzer on there.
Excellent.
But I would, yeah, so there's all that stuff. But I am a shameless self-promoter, so if you follow me on Twitter or on Instagram at Cally Beaton Comedian, then I always do lots of promotion of my upcoming gigs. So you'll always know where I am because I can't shut up about it on the old soap.
Super. Well, we will add those links into the episode description. And Cally, thank you so much again. Speak to you soon.
My pleasure. Thanks for having
Cheers,
me.
Cally. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
God, that was so great from Cally. She's such an incredibly insightful person. She's achieved so much. She's so intelligent. And she's so generous as well with her thoughts and time. I really loved chatting to Cally there, and I hope you enjoyed that conversation anywhere near as much as I did. Make sure you follow Cally on Twitter and check out her website for more of her really cool work. We'll add links to those into the episode description for you, so make sure you give them a click and see her great work for yourself. We got some really cool shows coming up over the next few weeks. We're back at the beautiful North Wall in Oxford on October 24th. Tickets are selling fast, so make sure you head to the North Wall's website to snap up tickets for what's going to be a really great night. We got some more nights at the Cheney School in Haddington coming up, including a spooky Halloween show. We've also got some of our wonderful improv shows coming to the Oxford Playhouse soon. For all the info on all Jericho comedy shows, give us a follow at Comedy Jericho on Twitter. Obviously, Cally and I spoke about Oxfordshire Mind and the importance of mental health services in the podcast. If you've enjoyed the podcast or any of our other shows, you can show your support by donating a few pounds to Oxfordshire Mind using our fundraising page, a link to which you can find in the episode description. We've raised over £70,000 for their vital work in the last few years, and we would be so grateful if you would help us raise a bit more for them and their vital work. Check out next week when I'm going to be chatting to another fantastic Jericho comedy performer. Until then, though, thank you so much for listening, and bye-bye.